Hello and welcome. Well, today we are talking about the draft gender policy. Now, those of you who follow PM Express, you know that anytime women issues come, we are very particularly interested. It's not just because the producer of the show is a woman, but we are genuinely concerned about women affairs. But today, we're here to discuss a draft policy. And my main aim is to find out is this one of those proverbial cases where, because they're not following the existing laws, let us add another one to them, and if we don't follow it, a few years down the line, they'll bring new policies. The Constitution is clear. The protection of women and children and people with the disability is clear in the Constitution. If we haven't abide by that, do we need another policy? And how are we going to abide by this policy if we haven't abide by the first one? My name is Nana Ansakwaro, and this is my concerns. PM Express. As soon as I come back, I will introduce my guest. Thank you very much for discussing the draft gender policy. It's a very, very important document, but I just want to find out why. Because if we haven't particularly been so well with the old ones, do we need a new one? With me to discuss this is Clark Noyoro, who is a Programs Officer, Policy Planning and Monitoring and Evaluation Directorate at the Ministry of Gender, Children and Social Protection. You're welcome, Clark.
Thank you.
Clark, let's just give a brief idea of what this new gender policy is about, and then we can go into it, the overview of the policy.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity to offer it to the Minister of Gender to actually discuss this national gender policy, draft national gender policy, I must say. Basically, the historical background of the national gender policy is based on the fact that per Article 17 of our Constitution, reference is made to the fact that no person shall be discriminated on the grounds of sex, race, and what have you. So based on that, and proud to even the 1992 Constitution, there had been some efforts to give gender issues a priority. You recall that during independence, Kwame Nkrumah, our first president, actually offered some opportunities for women to be in the National Assembly. I think about 10 women were in the National Assembly then. And proud to that too, there had been some international instruments that Ghana had acceded to. Typical among them is the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. It's really a mouth-watering kind of thing, which we basically call CEDAW. This convention actually looks at how to promote gender equality, women empowerment, and then creating equal opportunities for both men and women for socio-economic development. And Ghana ratified that convention. And proud to just after the ratification of the convention, there is the need for Ghana to put in place certain institutional mechanisms to give effect to the CEDAW Convention. Today's the National Council on Women and Development, which is now the Department of Gender, was set up. And this National Council on Women and Development was like the national machinery which was to give effect to the provisions of the CEDAW. That is to say, women empowerment, promotion of gender equality, promotion of gender equity, and what have you. And proud to that, and just after the National Council on Women and Development was put in place, a lot of interventions were put in place. Among them, the fact that we needed to set up what we call gender desk offices in ministries, departments, and agencies. And apart from that, to some institutions, some agencies like gender desk officers were also set up, and all these things were just to give effect to women empowerment and gender equality. Again, coming down the lane in 2001, when the Ministry of Women and Children's Affairs was set up, this was one of the greatest achievements as a country that we gave in respect of giving effect to the convention, the CEDAW convention that I spoke about. The Ministry of Women and Children's Affairs was basically set up to be like the national women machinery that will promote gender equality and equity, to the extent that a minister with a cabinet status was appointed. Then in 2013, under His Excellency President John Dramani Mahama, set up the Ministry of Gender, Children and Social Protection. The Ministry of Gender, Children and Social Protection is just an amalgamation of the Ministry of Women and Children's Affairs, in addition to expanding the mandate of the Ministry of Women and Children's Affairs to include social protection. In all these things, you realize that there has been the urge to promote gender equality and equity. And now with these backgrounds, that tells you that as a country, we are giving priority to setting up the national machinery to the effect of making sure that gender equality and equity issues are promoted. All these things are just to give effect to Article 17 of the Constitution, which is talking about the fact that no person shall be discriminated against in respect of sex and all that. Having come along all these things, then there's the need for us as a country to be able to come up with certain strategies, as you said in your introductory remarks, that the Constitution is there, the Acts of Parliament are there, but how do we give effect to the constitutional provision? Because even though the Constitution is there, provisions are to the effect that there has to be legislation that will give effect to the Constitution. And now we are talking about legislation such as the Domestic Violence Act, we are talking about the Human Trafficking Act, and other interstate succession law, and all these things are geared towards promoting gender equality and equity. So to be able to give effect to the constitutional provision, then you need a policy. A policy is a statement, or a policy is like a broad framework within a sector where certain actions are supposed to be taken to give effect to the constitutional provision. So the Constitution is good, but the Constitution by itself or per se will not be able to promote the intentions that are being contemplated in the Constitution. So we need a policy, and that's how come in 2004 we had a national, the Gender and Children's Policy. The Gender and Children's Policy combined gender issues with children issues, with the aim of promoting gender equality, women empowerment, and equity. So with that, we also felt that the policy is good, but you need to now come out with certain strategies that will promote gender equality and equity. So based on the 2004 Gender and Children's Policy, we realized that there were certain gaps in the policy implementation. First of all, there wasn't broad consultation with respect to the development processes of that policy, to the extent that when a policy came into being, you didn't have that ownership coming from stakeholders, MDAs, that's Metropolitan Municipal Industrial Assembly, ministries, departments, agencies, and most importantly, civil society organizations. And again, the 2004 Gender and Children's Policy did not also come out with a very comprehensive implementation strategy, that is, what are we going to do in respect of the provisions in that policy? Having identified all these, and the fact that it also combined children issues with gender, and you know, gender issues are broad, and children issues are also broad. So putting the two together wouldn't give the kind of result that, as a country, we needed. So there was the need to now separate the gender issues from children issue, and this now informed the idea of coming out with a national gender policy. And as we speak now, we also have something we call Child and Family Welfare Policy. It's before Cabinet, and once Cabinet adopts it, then it will come into effect. So basically, this is the historical background of the National Gender Policy.
Wow. Now, I'm glad you're separating gender issues from children issues. However, the ministry has been combined. And I've always been questioning that. Number one is about 4 ministries put together there. Are they being given, 4 budgets to be able to promote this? Because, you can't just write big English and hope that it works. It has to be promoted. I mean, is the ministry being funded enough to push this?
Fortunately, unfortunately, the ministry, as it stands now, has not been able to get even 1% of the national budget. I mean, historically, if you trace the budget of the ministry, you come to the conclusion that the funding for the ministry, budgetary allocation for the ministry has not been as adequate as one would have expected. And with the expanded mandate, in actual fact, the Minister of Gender, Children and Social Protection is just an expanded mandate of the Ministry of Women and Children's Affairs, to the extent that social protection issues have been added onto it. And as you rightly said, budget is very important because you need to have the kind of resources to be able to drive the vision of the ministry. But nonetheless, the ministry has a lot of collaboration with civil society organizations, development partners who are funding quite a couple of the things that we do. And on that note, I think we need a lot of funds to be able to drive gender issues. And as a civil society organization and all the private sector, I think it behoves on all of us to come on board and not just rely on government of Ghana funding. But there are certain issues that private sector can take up. There are certain aspects that as the media you could also take up to be able to help us do awareness creation, advocacy, community mobilization, because a lot of the issues have to do with sociocultural, and I think subsequently we may go into that.
I was just going to go there, see, because if we were brought up that way, you probably wouldn't have needed this policy. But we are brought up in a way to discriminate. We discriminate against people because they are visually impaired or because they're in a wheelchair, so we discriminate against them. And we discriminate from, I'm talking the lower level, right down to presidency are discriminated. You get to the highest and very important offices and there's no disabled facility or anything there. So I don't know what, it doesn't matter how elaborate, I'm reading through the policy, it doesn't matter how elaborate it is, the deadline for, even meeting our disabled access thing is almost elapsed and nothing has been done. So what more policies do we need? Because we haven't even obeyed the old ones, as I was saying in my intro.
Thank you very much. I think discrimination is it's not only in Ghana alone. Discrimination is everywhere, to the extent that when you go to some jurisdiction, the color of your skin will determine the kind of services that will be provided. And I think apart from the fact that it's socio-cultural, it has socio-cultural underpinnings, we just have to start working on it. The most important thing is, as children, I think the way we were brought up also accounts for all these things. For instance, some of us, when we were kids, and you went into the kitchen to kind of find out what is in the kitchen, the next thing your daddy, who if he wasn't gender sensitive, would say, "What are you doing in the kitchen? What the hell are you doing here? You are supposed to be out there." And the kitchen is actually meant for the girls or something of that sort. And that is the bane of our gender issues. Because in some jurisdictions, we realize that it's the women will do the cooking, and sometimes the men will do the cooking. And then the man will go and do the dish. In our case, it's the opposite. So here, the bottom line is, how do we as a country or a society recognize that the issue of gender is just about the roles that all of us play? The roles that men and women play for socio-economic development. So I think the most important thing is what we can do right now is to promote sensitization and awareness creation. And these things can really start from the basic level. How we can incorporate some of these things into the basic level, how we are being brought up and all those. And I think we need a lot of advocacy and sensitization activities to be able to bridge this issue of discrimination and gender-related issues.
The other thing which I find is, I'm reading through this thing, and unless you are very, very, very educated, it's too much English, and yet still, we need to own it so that we are happy to implement it. But it is such a way that it disconnects the very people who you need to, because sorry to mention names, but you don't probably need to educate people like Esnousu and stuff on stuff like this. But meanwhile, the language is targeted at them. So the average miss who you need to educate, so they educate their children, will not relate to these things. I think we enjoy too much technicalities.
Very well. I think the most important thing is that every policy document has a standard of language which is being used. Just to bear in mind that a policy is a statement of intention as to what you want to do to be able to improve your socio-economic lives and style, so to say. So even though the language seems to be a little bit technical, at the end of the day, if this policy, as we are developing, is still in its developmental stages, at the end of the day, we are going to get it in a language that is acceptable to all of us. And apart from that, we are going to come up with something we call an implementation strategy. This one is now going to take each policy commitment area and break it down to actionable things, so to say. So the policy is just a statement to compel or to just tell policymakers and decision makers that, hey, we've come of age, we need to do A, B, C, D to promote the interests of our women, to promote the interests of all persons in the country, especially the vulnerable, and then to make sure that, you know, the most interesting thing is that in budget preparation, you have to find where you think there is a basis for which you think government of Ghana or any development partner should support you. Mm-hmm. So for instance, if you don't have a policy on gender, it may be very difficult for you to go and convince Ministry of Finance or any of the development partners that, hey, I need A, B, C, D resources to be able to do A, B, C, D activities. Because the bottom line, they will ask you, where is the basis? So the policy is a commitment on the part of government and its stakeholders that we want to do A, B, C, D for women, we want to do A, B, C, D for men, we want to make sure that the socioeconomic lifestyles of women and children and men are promoted. So based on that, you use it as a tool in mobilizing resources. So we need to have this policy to be able to do these things that I spoke about.
But realistically, if we don't go to Ministry of Education and start reorienting kindergarten and class 1 children to grow up the way we want to grow up, we are old dogs, and you're trying to teach us new tricks. You know, I'm not going to get up today and say, well, because I talked to Clark now, hey, I'm going in the kitchen, or my viewers are going to say, what Clark is saying makes sense. I could see I leave the kitchen, now I'm going to do the kitchen chores. They've gone past that, they don't even believe in it. So should we focus on the ones growing up and just, you know, write off the old ones?
I think it's important, apart from the fact that we have to incorporate gender issues in our curricula, starting from the primary school or wherever we find ourselves. We also have to see it as a national issue. Mm-hmm. So that it doesn't just have to be in, you know, there are some people who may be in school, they come out of school and they are still, excuse me to say, kids. Mm-hmm. So it's about making it part and parcel of our lives. Apart from the fact that it has to be part of the formal educational system, it should be part of us. For instance, traditional authorities, they hold a lot of powers. If you're able, and over the years, we've been collaborating a lot with them to the extent that they are now appreciating the fact that, for instance, you go to the National House of Chiefs, not a number of them are women. Almost all of them are men. How do the men make decisions for the women? We want to promote women issues. And the unit or the body that is supposed to make decisions for women, for the whole country, is all full of men. So in that vein, we need to engage the traditional authorities, we need to engage community leaders, we need to engage almost everybody to appreciate that gender issue is for developmental purposes. So that we don't now have to wait till the person gets to school and we start, because otherwise we will just be like, we wouldn't be doing that much. So we need to collectively see it as one of the issues that we have to all come together and start, wherever we find ourselves, start talking about gender issue. As a parent, you don't say, oh, you're a girl, so you are supposed to be reading general arts, and you're a boy, you're supposed to be reading science so that you become a doctor or whatever. No, you have to give every child the kind of opportunity that child needs to be able to unearth his or her skills. So I think it's a national issue. We all have to get on board, and then the educational aspect too is also very important.
See, I proposed this once, and I was deemed to be being a favoritism towards women, that, you know, because of our limited resources, even though they said F-cube and everybody should be in school, realistically we can't take everybody to school. I think we manage about 57% rate at the moment. If we make sure that every girl was in school, in a few years' time, you wouldn't even have to give anybody free education, because any educated woman, even if they have to sell their cloth to educate their offspring, will do that. So why don't we make a plan which would mature in 20 years or 25 years that, listen, between now and then, every child or every girl is going to be educated, and not just going through classroom, but proper education, and they would, you know, So we won't be here having this discussion.
Very well, very well. I think the most important, that's one of the focus of this policy, is to make sure that certain, we call it affirmative action. I think pretty soon we'll be coming out with, there's already a draft affirmative action. We are still collaborating with the Ministry of Justice to come out with an affirmative action legislation. And the essence of the legislation is to make sure that we correct all the imbalances that are inhibiting the rights and welfare of the girl child or women, so to say. Affirmative action is good, and as you rightly said, and the most important thing is that if you go to Ministry of Education, they have started this bit of the girl child education unit, which is actually promoting girls' education. But as you rightly put, the most important thing is that how are we able to make sure that these girls do not just enroll in school, but they are retained and moved to the higher level. And that's the focus of this policy. Once this policy comes on board, we are now going to link up with the Ministry of Education to find out what are the gender issues in Ministry of Education. And out of that, they will incorporate it in this policy, and then together we'll develop a strategic implementation plan in the educational sector to find out what are the gender issues that we need to really put interventions through. And the strategic implementation plan will address that. But I think collectively, there is a need for us to start a campaign. I think that when the girl child education policy was introduced, in some regions, so to say, enrollment really shut up. And just a couple of times, I understand, then you realize that the girls are not only in school, but they're also enjoying school. And then the more the girl attends school, the less the girl becomes vulnerable to all the impediments that we talk about, sexual abuse and violence, and the fact that a child will be given out of marriage and all those things. So I think it's a good thing, and that's one of the focus areas of this policy document.
You sort of touched on that. Let me see, because with all your best intentions that you are doing here, you also rely on other things. Because, I mean, 50% of the schools may not have toilets. So you've done everything to protect this child, to send the child to school. And then at that time of the month, there's no toilets, and therefore the child misses out in school, and therefore misses out on classwork and everything. So how is this policy going to make sure that, you know, all the way, everybody who has to help is helping?
Very well. I think that one of the focus areas of this policy is to have a link with all the stakeholders. Minister of Health, Minister of Education, Minister of Employment and Labor, all the key sectors. Minister of Local Government and Rural Development. And you could also refer to a provision in the Children's Act, which is to the effect that the District Assembly has oversight responsibility when it comes to issues of the child. So one of the key things that we are trying to do is to link up with the Minister of Local Government and Rural Development. And in actual fact, this policy will assign roles and responsibilities. For instance, if you pick Minister of Local Government and Rural Development, the policy will identify certain roles and responsibilities for that. And it isn't the policy, it isn't Minister of Gender and Children's, Minister of Gender and Social Protection, which is going to say Minister of Local Government and Rural Development, do A, B, C, D. That's why we are doing this policy together. So we will just contact Minister of Local Government and Rural Development. What are the gender issues that you think should feature in this policy? Then they come out with it. When we are developing the strategic implementation plan, we lay before them, and they own the policy. They will own the strategic implementation plan. And at the end of the day, it becomes something that they owe. So it's not something that is being imposed on them. It becomes, therefore, a responsibility on them not to just say, well, construction of school blocks and all those things are just one of the things, but it becomes part of their developmental plan. Because if you look at the policy objective, it's to mainstream gender in all spheres of lives. So that means that if you are mainstreaming gender issue, it means that in every sector, gender issues should be mainstreamed. So that when it comes to planning, when it comes to development of strategic plans and development of budgets and all those things, gender issues are there. So that it doesn't become something new. It becomes part and parcel of the role and responsibility of that sector. So I think with this policy, we should be able to achieve that.
I'm going to take a break here. When I come back, I mean, at the moment we have FQ, which is free, compulsory, education. Everybody should be in school, of school-going age. All your mother or your father has to do is walk you to the nearest school and say, look, my daughter is underage and has to be in school, and the school should admit the child. How many times don't we drive past traffic lights and see them selling pawpaw, sugarcane, sachet water, name it? Again, every school should have a place, a toilet, as basic as that. Yet 50% of the schools, these policies, these things have all been there before these policies coming in place. Stay tuned. You want to find out how we'll achieve this. Discussing the draft gender policy, and with me in studio is Clark Noyuru, who's a Programs Officer, Policy Planning, Monitoring and Evaluation Directorate of the Ministry of Gender, Social, Children and Social Protection. A mouthful ministry. I call it Ministry of Everything in there. Hope they have all the money. But just before the break, Clark, I was just wondering how, laws like F-Cube, how we are blatantly flouted it. You go to Fiesta Royal traffic light and the police are sharing the traffic light with children who should not be there at that hour. But they're there, the police are doing nothing. Again, 50% of schools just don't have a place for the children to use if they need to, a place of convenience. These are such laws that we flouted blatantly, openly, freely. So with this elaborate policy coming up, what clause is in here that would let the local authority say, if I don't fix my toilet, I'm going to lose my job? Or the policeman says, listen, if I don't take this child to school and the IGP drives past, I'm going to lose my job?
Very well. I think it's important for us to note that this policy is to be implemented in consonance with the existing laws and existing policies, so to say. As I said, apart from the fact that we are drafting this national gender policy, there's also something that is before Cabinet as I speak, which is on the child and family welfare policy. This policy is trying to strengthen that family as a basis for the growth and development of the child. It's important for us to also note that if a child is on the streets, it's a failure on all of us. Because as a parent, what kind of responsibilities are we having in respect of the care of the child? Some will complain that they don't have money, and for which reason the child is out there to fend for himself or herself. But I dare to say that the same parents, some of them, who say they don't have money, when it comes to social events, they're able to find money to be able to do that. Take outdooring, for example. Take wedding, for example. The same parent who complains he or she doesn't have money has money to do other things. So then that means that it has to do with the priority that as parents we place on a child. Suffices to say that some parents are genuinely poor. And as a result of that, the ministry is implementing the LEAP program. And this is a direct cash transfer program which is providing direct cash transfer to parents and households who are poor and vulnerable. And as part of the implementation strategy, you have to make sure that your child is in school. You have to make sure that your child is not a subject matter of child labor. So all these things are being put in place to be able to address the kind of things we see on the street. Again, as part of the policy implementation strategy, as I said, we are going to link up with all our stakeholders, Ministry of Education, Ministry of Local Government and Rural Development, Ministry of the Interior, to be able to find out how we can balance the issues to make sure that not only are we addressing gender issues, but we are also promoting the welfare of women and children in Ghana. So it's not just going to be something, it's really very bad when you see a child. I actually drove one day to one of the traffic lights, and a child passed by and asked him, "Why are you not in school?" He looked at me and said, "Gentlemen, you are just wearing your tie with your car and all those, and do you know how much money I make a day?" I felt so ashamed of myself, because he really didn't see the essence of education. But the bottom line is, as I said, we have to strengthen the family. The family unit is becoming weakening, and because gone were those days, the extended family system used to be very strong, but now we are all going nuclear, and it's just you, your family, and all that. So the child and family welfare policy, as I spoke about, will be outdoored, and out of that, we should be able to strengthen the family, give enough resources or resource the family to be able to do the very roles and responsibility that the family is assigned. Because if you're able to strengthen the family, then I think half of the issues will be solved. You don't need to have a situation where children are now coming to the street and now we now have to, it's not like in some jurisdiction where they have the social program and all those things, if you need shelter and all those things. We come from a very unique country and a very unique continent where we believe in the family. So even if your parents are not there, the extended family should be there. And I think one way out, and as part of this policy, is to strengthen to empower women. Because a lot of the irresponsibility issues are coming up because some men are shaking their responsibilities. So this policy is talking about women empowerment. I think it's one of the policy objectives, to empower women. We are empowering them socioeconomically. That is to say, if they have certain skills that needs to be developed, then we assist them to be able to develop those skills. We are providing the avenues for them to be able to go to school. We are encouraging them to be able to take into politics. We are encouraging them to be able to do all the things that ordinarily a man is doing. So that once a woman is empowered, believe you me, a number of the issues relating to the child running around in town and looking for, fending for himself or herself will go down. So that is one of the focus areas of this policy.
This empowerment, is it the woman's ability to earn or the woman's ability to learn or educate themselves?
I think it's a combination of all, because there are some women who are very, very talented, and I really dove my heart to all women who are very talented, but the circumstances in which they find themselves will not make them be able to progress in life. For instance, at the age of, we are having cases where children are given out of marriage. We are having instances where a girl of, let's say, 20 years is given out of marriage, where that girl can be in school, go to the university, develop his or her career and all that. So, apart from the fact that you need to give skills, you also have to provide some direction as to how. And sometimes, because of the patriarchal nature of our system, we tend to underlook women. We tend to say, oh, as for this one, it's for men and all those things. So you need to encourage them to take on certain things that they think and feel comfortable to do. And I think that is where the issue of empowerment is. It's not only just giving them money, but it's also giving them the opportunities to be able to identify their God-given talents and utilize it. And once they're able to identify, who really doesn't like it when you're able to identify the kind of skills that you have and you're able to exhibit that skill? That is the essence of this policy, creating that opportunity for every person to be able to exhibit his or her skills, including women. And if some are lagging behind, then we should do a diagnosis to find out what is really causing them not moving up. Has it got to do with sociocultural practices, where once you get married and that's it, you become a housewife and all those things? And so we should be, or some are subjected to female genital mutilation, trochosis and all those things. So once we're able to do all these things, then we should be able to tackle it and probably come up with some advocacy strategies. Go to community, and then do a lot of talking. Get community leaders, make sure that we identify focal persons, because one important thing in community development and for empowerment of women is to get focal persons.
Clark, you see, the 21st century is now 15 years old. So this policy is probably about, God knows, 1,000 years old. But better late than never. However, the backlog of people who have missed the net because we couldn't enforce it one way or the other, the number of teenage pregnancies, ridiculous. How are we going to segment or are we going to national? How are you going to tackle the problem? Because the problem out there is, enormous, and we don't have the money.
Yeah. One of the things, if you look at the policy, there's going to be a bit on research. We should be able to do comprehensive national research to really find out what is the current status. Because if you don't do a research, you'll not be able to find out what the situation is, and you can't prescribe any intervention. So one of the implementation strategy, as far as the policy is concerned, will be research. do gender-related research. We can engage civil society organizations, we can engage academia, we can engage people who are really well-versed in research to be able to do that research for us. And once we do the research, we know the findings, then it helps you to kind of come out with the interventions that you need. Otherwise, if you just sit and you don't even know the situation, you start giving prescription, I think that would be wrong. So, I mean, I would just say that for now, not until we're able to do that research and find out. There's some data out there, but still we need to do a very comprehensive research to really find out what the situation is. And once we do that, we should be able to design the kind of implementation strategies to deal with the situation.
See, as of 2010, I think there were 63,000 children sleeping rough in Accra alone. 63,000. And funny enough, they didn't even add Kayaye to it, even though Kayaye was also, I think they were about 30,000 Kayaye by 2009. That was a year before. God knows how many they are now. So, I mean, even just Accra, Kumasi, Takoradi, Cape Coast, the major cities having come, I mean, that's a huge task. And like you said, you and I have left this, problem to degenerate to this place. I really want to find a clause in there that makes us wake up and realize that, oh no, we are shedding our responsibility. There isn't enough housing. We are 2 million houses upside down. Does this policy let us build houses so that we keep the children at home rather than at Fadama and off the streets? Because physically, there isn't a place for them to stay with all good intention. How is this policy going to address that?
Very well. I think it's important to note that this policy is not going to solve all the socioeconomic issues that we have as a country. As I said, the most important thing is we will be identifying the gender issues in each sector. For instance, we talk about housing. We should be able to find out what are the gender issues in terms of housing. Is it that men are having houses and women are not having houses? If that is the case, then we should be able to...
You take something like Kayaye. They've traveled from north, down south to come and make ends meet, probably stay and go back. And the whole policy is to make sure that, the woman is empowered. And the Kayaye has to be empowered so that they don't do the things they're doing. Yeah, they need to be in school to become a nurse or a teacher rather than a head porter. So, I mean, how do we address this?
Yeah, the most important thing, as I've said already, is to be able to link up with all the sectors that we have these socioeconomic challenges. And we want to be coming out with a strategic implementation plan. And one of the key interventions will be advocacy. And because advocacy really can solve a lot of the issues. There are projects, some CSO, one CSO did a project where they tried to, they got some Kayaye, trained them, gave them some equipment, gave them pocket money for them to go to wherever they came from. And when they got back to wherever they came from, the next day, thousands of them came because it served as an incentive. Because they said, well, you came to Accra, you came to Kumasi, you were able to get a sewing machine and some things. Why don't we also go? So the most important thing is we have to couch a very, very good and strategic communication strategy that can send the information out there. And this time we are going to involve almost everybody. Parents will have a role to play. As a parent, what are you supposed to do to make sure that your child just doesn't migrate? Migration is good, but there has to be a purpose for that migration. As community members, what are you supposed to do to make sure that when you don't see a member of the community, you start asking questions? And believe you me, there was a project that the Department of Children did, which was what they termed community child protection teams. And these teams were formed for the purposes of making sure that child labor and all those things do not occur. So we went for monitoring, and the question they started asking, we asked them questions as to how they did the monitoring. They said what they do is that they visit home to home. And if they know Kwesi Mensah has 10 children, Ekuya Ifua has about 2 children, if within a period they don't see the child, they start asking questions. So one of the policy strategy is to do in-depth communication, to do a lot of community mobilization, because a lot of the issues are coming from the community. And you can't sit in Accra and start solving the problem. You have to get to where the problems are coming from. So we are going to engage a lot of the communities, sensitize them, get them involved in the gender issues, So that at least they will be addressing the gender issues there, they will be addressing the socioeconomic issues there, and then those of us as policymakers or decision makers, we will also be addressing it. So it's going to be like a collective effort. It's not just going to be the Minister of Gender alone. It's going to be a collective. The media will have a role to play. We are going to assign you a role as far as the strategic implementation plan is concerned, so that you should be able to come out with some media interventions to help us do advocacy and awareness creation.
See, the other thing is about culture and empowerment. I mean, should we all be like Americans or Australians? I mean, are we know who we are, and maybe for us, girls are in the kitchen and boys are washing the cars, and that's how we grow up? I mean, is it right or wrong that we switch roles or share the role? You know, should we by all means that, oh, this is not your place and that's not his place?
I think culture, as we always say, is dynamic. And whatever culture you're importing, you should decide that that culture really helps you to develop. I do not think that it's really a good culture to say that assign roles, what we call gender stereotyping. You say this particular job is for a man or that particular job is for a woman. The most important thing is, who is that person? What skills does that person have? How can we help that person to be able to unearth his or her skills? That should be the basis, and not the fact that you're a man or you're a woman, or the fact that you're a girl or you're a boy. Sometimes it's a little bit challenging, because the moment you start gender stereotyping by assigning roles arbitrarily, you end up kind of affecting the kind of thing the person wants to do. And a lot of stories are told of persons who were made to read medicine and they ended up feeling that they should have done well if they had probably gone into driving. And I think that should be the basis. So the essence, the bottom line is that whatever culture we find ourselves, and the Constitution is very clear on cultural issues, any cultural issues which is dehumanizing should not be encouraged. So that means that whatever culture that we have, which tends to inhumanize or which tends to dehumanizes any person for purposes of letting the person to identify who he or she is, that cultural practice should not be encouraged. And I think assigning rules is wrong. Let a person find himself what he or she wants to do, and that should be the basis.
The other thing also is, at any time you find a program like this, the boys are left out, and then you focus on the girls as to don't do this, don't do that, don't do this. But it becomes a man's world, and therefore the men are going to make the rules. So if you don't orient the boys to accept the fact that roles shouldn't be assigned, be a course 22 where we are going around and, you know, work done will be zero.
Very well. I think in everything that we do in respect of gender, you have to identify role models. And as you rightly said, in a patriarchal society as we have, it's very difficult to get almost every man on board if that person is really steep in his beliefs that, hey, quote unquote, women are inferior. So you just have to get someone who, and a lot of the men are very good. So what we try to do is that we just don't do it for girls alone, where we do a combination of boys and girls, and you get a man out there or you get a boy out there who will be able to be an advocate. It's really important if you're able to get someone outside there. For instance, if you get a man who is advocating for gender issues, it helps. Because when a woman is talking, sometimes you say, oh, this is women issues and all those. But if you're able to get a role model, you're able to get community leaders who are really subscribing to gender issues, it really helps. And I think it's really not a good strategy to just focus on just the girls alone, but just to do a combination of all and identify role models, guys, who can really do the job.
Talking about role models, one thing that this policy is looking at is to encourage women into leadership position, and particularly in political positions. But is that what really women want to do? I'm not saying is it their place. Maybe they're just comfortable behind supporting the men. Who knows? Stay tuned, we're coming back. Well, thank you very much for staying, discussing the draft gender policy. Just before the break, I was just trying to find out, you know, the empowerment of women and carrying them into politics and then carrying them into leadership position. And I'm not saying women are not fit for that position at all, but I'm saying is that are we pushing them and forcing them? The nature of our politics, you know, you mount platforms, you are gallivanting from north to south. I mean, do they want to also leave home because, well, he's a man, he left home for 3 weeks gallivanting, so I'm also going to do that and then leave childcare for what, the man and then the house help? Or, I mean, it's just how the world is. You know, yes, by all means you get women who join it, but would you get as many women as men, 50-50, to say, yes, let's do on a campaign trail and gallivant up and down the country?
Very well. I think the most important thing is, have we created a platform for them? It's good when a man goes out for over 2 weeks, 1 month, and doesn't come home. The woman can stay home and take care of the kids. Why should it be a problem when the woman goes for 1 month and doesn't come home? The man cannot take care of the kids. I think the most important thing is, and history even tells us that during the struggle for independence, women were part of it.
Yes.
You look at the world, a lot of women leaders.
I mean, see, I know by all means you would get a woman or two. I believe that women in leadership positions do very well. I believe that. But what I'm saying is that, I mean, particularly in politics, like in parliament, so there isn't enough women representative. But I mean, if you look at what the terrain is, do women want to go through that, you know, to get into parliament?
Absolutely. The few who are there, who are able to do it. The most important thing I keep on asking is, have we created a level playing field for all persons to go through?
And what would a level playing field be?
For instance, a number of the women, they have to stay at home, take care of their kids, and still have to run everything. They have to be able to get money to be able to do billboards and all those things. They have to be able to mount a platform and talk and get supporters and all those things. Nothing. And the system is so, we have created a man's world, so to say, to the extent that it makes it difficult for the woman to do. One thing that we have to do is let the playing field be filled so that at least everybody can play the ball. But if we create a situation in such a manner that, well, the woman has to stay at home, you know, the terrain is difficult, and sometimes it's about discouragement. We paint a very horrific picture to the extent that just to scare them. But I think we should rather be encouraging them.
So would you say that then, like you form a culture for the big parties that, listen, 30% of your MPs should be women, whether you like it or not? So you form a quota so that they then have to decide that, look, in Suhum or in this area, whether we like it or not, we need to field a woman.
Absolutely, that's one of the things, and I think a number of the political and the manifestos of the parties are making provision for quota for women. And I think a provision in the affirmative action bill is also focusing on making sure that there are certain positions or there are certain seats that are reserved for women and all those. So I think if you're able to change the landscape of society, and if you're not getting women, then we can blame them. But the bottom line is that this landscape is so unfair to them. And now we turn around and say they can't do it.
But women never vote for women anyway.
I'm not aware of that.
Well, I mean, if Aloko was a presidential candidate and if there were 51% of women, you know, I mean, there are more women than men. Her votes did not suggest that she got enough votes from the women. So are we not in danger of just putting somebody there because she wears a cabaret slit rsather than somebody who's going to be there because she's capable?
I respectfully disagree with that, because the most important thing is, if we want to do a very, very good analysis, can we look at those in parliament and say whether or not their performance is so abysmal to the extent that we don't want to vote for them? Not until we do that. But I think, in my respectful view, I think what I've seen so far is that those in parliament are doing so well. So the most important thing is that clear all the obstacles and let them get into politics. And let's stop this idea of patriarchal society and chauvinism that, hey, she's the woman, she has to stay and take care of the kids, and I have to be running around for 1 week. Let her on to go, and you take care of the kids. We just have to change that kind of attitude and give them the opportunity. And I think It's all about harnessing human resources. There are some men who may be in politics or leadership position that are not performing. And you need a woman to be able to go there. So if you're able to remove all these inhibitions, social culture, because the first thing is, in some cultures, the moment you're a woman and you man a platform, see, you will start getting names. And that is what we have to be able to deal with. Is it because she's a woman that we are giving her names, or we are looking at whether the person is capable of doing that which she has volunteered or she wants to do? So we should look at rather the skills and then the capabilities of that person rather than just the sex of that person. And I think so far, the women that I've seen in politics, the women that I've seen in the judiciary, the women that I've seen in public life, the deputy ministers, the ministers, they are all doing so well. And I think we just have to take out that perception that, hey, we are forcing women. They want to do it. They have the skills, they have the capabilities, and we just have to give them the opportunity to be able to do that.
You see, chief executive roles and that non-political roles, yeah. But in our politics, I would tell women, I would advise any woman, look, stay away from it. I would advise, there's too much insults, there's too much heckling, there's too much money, you probably end up compromised. And I believe that they are generally more, of better nature than men are. But by the time they go through this mill, they'll probably become like us.
So why don't we clear all these things? We just have to clear the system and make sure that there's a level playing field for all persons. And that's the essence of this policy. What are some of the challenges that inhibit women from taking leadership positions? Is it about social culture? Is it about funding? Is it about what? Let's deal with all these things. And once we're able to deal with all these things, we should be able to get as many women in politics or as many women into leadership positions as we want. Because at the end of the day, it inures to our benefits. Because we are looking at how to harness the resources of the country. And do we just say that the only viable resources is in men? I don't think so. No country can really develop if you are just harnessing your resources from just one sex of the population. And look at Sally, she's doing very well. Angela Merkel, she's doing very well. So why don't we give it a try?
You see, I'm not saying that women are not capable, not at all.
Absolutely.
And I always argue that, well, you see, the biological nature, whatever it is, I keep saying that somehow puts women in a different position than men rather than the same. Not higher, not lower, just in a different position than men are. And that's just how God created the world.
I strongly disagree. I strongly disagree because the basis is, are we looking at skills, competence, and all those things? If you're looking for that, if the woman has it, why not? Let's put her there because that is her skill, that is her competence. But if we start saying that, well, the world is so rigorous, the political field is so bad, and society will be looking down on you and all, then that means we are giving excuses to empowering them. Let's stop all these excuses, give them the opportunity, and I think they'll do better than what we've always perceived.
Clark, thank you very much. Well, viewers, that's what's coming up. So let's wait for this draft to come in, and I just hope that it's coined in a way that we can all own our part or our responsibility, and then we all throw our hearts in there and make sure it works. Because whether we like it or not, we need to empower women for the nation to grow, and especially children too. Thank you very much, and as I said, tomorrow we'll be back to do it all over again. Thank you.
Thank you.